Hey guys, how you doing? I figured this would be easier for us to get this information across. I think everybody understands right now the need to minimize our contact. So this way you can still get the information and we can do it all remotely. I will follow up with everybody that was included in this Lunch and Learn personally to just check in with you, see if you have any questions or if there's anything I can help to do with your user experience of Enscape. I just want to go over the first slide here. Basically, Enscape is a ray tracing program that allows for real-time rendering of 3D environments with what we're already doing in our Revit modeling currently. So everything we do with construction documents can now be brought into a 3D environment, and that 3D environment can be used for client presentations, it can be used for actual renderings and presentation documents, but most importantly, it can be used to help develop the design itself. By looking at a 3D environment, you can refine what the actual Revit model looks like and have a more complete building design by viewing it in a 3D environment. So the main requirements are going to be that you do have Revit installed and you have Enscape installed in Revit. So we've switched to 2020 Revit, also in 2019 and 2018 as well. Currently, in the Newark and Wilmington, or Newark and Dover office, we're sharing 3 licenses of Enscape. So you're going to want to just check in with all the users, make sure you have access. Sometimes we do have to trade off use, depending on prioritizing who needs it. In Wilmington, you guys might have a license already. I'm not exactly sure, but I will follow up with IT and make sure that we have everything set up for you guys to use Enscape going forward. The nice thing about Enscape is everything is completely stereographic or in 360 degrees. So when you get inside of your Revit model, you'll be able to see everything, which is really useful in clash detection or determining where maybe the building isn't quite as complete as you thought it was just from looking at a 2D drawing. So moving forward, I want to get everybody set up on how to start Enscape. Once you have Enscape installed, you have the ribbon at the top where you see File, Architecture, Structure, Steel. Along that ribbon, you'll see the Enscape tab. It's in between add-ins and quantification. The Enscape tab is what's going to allow you to open up the toolbar for Enscape and to actually start the Enscape rendering software. So you press the start button to launch Enscape environment, and a new window will open up automatically. So as I said, the Enscape tab is located along the top ribbon, just underneath where you'll see Autodesk Revit and then the year and project number. You'll be able to see that Enscape tab. A really important consideration you want to look at here is the Ensure section box is not checked to start. If you have the section box clipping the image at all, your Enscape is going to clip your image. It relies on your section box to do such. So make sure that's unchecked just to start if you're going from the 3D view. One other thing I want to try to show here. If you look in the lower right hand corner, you can see that you click on the 3D view first, and that 3D view is going to be your Enscape default environment. So it's going to start from that 3D view. So moving forward, I want to talk a little bit about the controls. The controls are always shown at the bottom of the screen, so if you get lost, you can reference that. If it's the instruction panel, it can be hidden using the H button, as it shows on the legend at the bottom. I'm going to start by talking about moving around. If you're in the model in Enscape, you can move around using either the arrows or the WASD function. W would correspond to the up arrow, A would correspond to the left arrow, D would correspond to the right arrow, and S would correspond to the back arrow, or moving backwards. So The best way to describe the use of Enscape within the 3D environment is to think about gaming in the first person. First person gaming console platforms such as Call of Duty, GoldenEye, if you go back a little bit further, even early computer games like Doom. I know it might be an obscure reference, but that's sort of how the controls are set up here. So on the one hand, you're using the arrows to move in the X and Y direction along the model, and then you're using the mouse as the angle of the camera, just as you would in a first-person gaming scenario. The mouse is the angle of the camera in 360 degrees, so you could theoretically hold the forward button down, the forward arrow down, or the W key, and use the mouse to steer yourself through the model by changing the angle of the camera in 360 degrees. So that's a little bit about the movement in the XY direction and controlling the camera using the mouse. If you're in walk mode, you're going to be on the ground plane. If you're in fly mode, you're going to be able to ascend and descend through the model. The way to toggle through those different modes is by the space bar. If you press the space bar, it's going to move you to fly mode, and you'll be able to ascend up using the E button, or fly down, descend down using the Q button, so the vertical movement within the model. That's in fly mode. If you press spacebar again, it will drop you to the ground plane, and you'll be in walk mode. In walk mode, you stay always on the ground plane. If you go to a door, it will automatically let you walk through that door. If you get to stairs, it will follow the vertical height of those stairs up, and you'll be able to follow the path of the stairs just like you're walking. So you toggle through those two commands with spacebar. And keep in mind that all of those tools are visible at the bottom of the screen in the instructions. If you press H, you can toggle those on and off again. So if you get lost. One other thing that's mentioned on that instructions, we'll talk about on the next slide, is the time of day and orbit. So on orbit, you hold down the right mouse button, and it will allow you to pan around the model. It's similarly to the way Revit works when an item is selected. Whatever your mouse's cursor is on, when you press the right button, you're going to orbit around that object. So, you know, if you're familiar with 3D modeling, you should understand a little bit about how we manipulate the view by orbiting around the model so that we can get a better view of what we're looking at. The right mouse button will do the same thing in Enscape. If you were to hold down the shift button while you press the right mouse button, you're going to be able to change the time of day. This is a really powerful functionality in Enscape, as the lighting quality, particularly when the materials have been applied with reflectance and irritants and bumps and all the great features that are available, you're going to have some really powerful imagery. So by holding down the shift button and clicking the right mouse button and dragging it left or right, or dragging it across the screen, you'll change the time of day. And you can see the path of the sun as it will chart around the building. If your building is oriented correctly, you're going to have the actual shadows and solar array of the actual site. So it's one more reason to orient your project in the right direction in Revit, and it will give you really compelling shadows and imagery for your light studies. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this before. The scope box is a really good method of controlling what you're looking at in Revit. If you are to click on the scope box and shrink down the scope box to a certain component, it will also do the same in your Enscape 3D environment. So if you want to look at a particular part of the building, you can add a scope box in the Revit interface, and it will create a scope box in the Enscape interface. So the scope box kind of works between both platforms. It's an important thing to keep in mind, because sometimes you may not be able to figure out why all of your model isn't showing, and it's typically the scope box is creating a problem there. Also, hidden objects within the Enscape environment will work with Revit. So if something's hidden in your Revit 3D view, it's going to also be hidden in your Enscape 3D view that links to it. And that can help with imagery, but mostly can help you to navigate your model. If something's missing, check the Show All or Reveal Hidden Elements button. It's a light bulb at the bottom of your screen in Revit. That will show you if something's hidden. You can hide it, turn it off, turn it back on, and it will reflect in your Enscape 3D environment. So let's say you had to make a change to your model while you have Enscape open. What you would do is look at the Enscape tab at the top of your screen in the Revit window. Click on that Enscape tab, and then in the top left of the ribbon for Enscape, you'll see Pause or Resume Live Updates. By pausing it, you're stopping Enscape from receiving new data from Revit, and it will no longer update the Enscape model. So this will greatly allow your speed in changing the model, because every time you make a change, if live updates are on, it will try to update your Enscape. So it will slow down your changes. So every time you want to change the model, you want to first pause live updates and then make your change, and then resume live updates after your change has been completed, so that will update your Enscape model and you can continue to utilize your 3D environment. Through settings, in the settings tab on the Enscape toolbar, you'll see that there is a great deal of functionality in the way that you can manipulate the environment. You can add things like field of view, depth of view, render quality, brightness, background type, and orientation. There's a lot that you can put into that, and there's a lot of variability between some of these different parameters to create photorealism in your renderings and 3D environments. Exposure, saturation, color, temperature, they can really help to dial in your 3D environment in such a way that you no longer require the use of Photoshop or any post-processing software. You can simply use the built-in settings in Enscape to create the kind of feel and environment that you want, the atmospheric qualities of your 3D environment. Lens flares, I think, is a really powerful tool to create compelling imagery. What that does is shows the effect of the rays of sunlight as they hit in the model, which we already talked a little bit about how the solar path is charted in Enscape and why that is an important part of your 3D environment. You can also control other atmospheric qualities such as cloud cover, fog, sun, moon intensity. I think this is really important, especially when we're talking about compelling imagery. Typically, as I've found as an artistic renderer, the atmospheric qualities of the image go a lot further than sometimes even the quality of the architecture to create some emotional excitement for the viewer. So look at things like lens flare, fog, and daylighting and night lighting qualities to build your imagery, build your 3D environment. All of that can be accessed through the settings button on the Enscape toolbar at the top of your Revit screen. I want to talk a little bit about how to set up a view. At the end of this video, and then along with the email that this view is attached to, I'm going to give you a link to a video I've already screened that has a really good real-time walkthrough in Revit to help you navigate this process if it's a little bit tricky to do from just a PowerPoint. But basically what you do is you go back to the View tab in Revit. View tab is at the top of your screen, and you'll see the button that looks like a little house. That's your 3D view. And in that 3D view, if you press the drop down, you'll see the camera button. The camera button allows you to place a camera location and view cone and angle within the Revit model. So you start with a floor plan, then you click the 3D view camera creation button, and then in the floor plan you click and drag in the direction you want to view in your image. Once you do that, you can manipulate that camera a little bit. It's a little bit of a tricky process if you've never done it before. I'm happy to answer any questions on setting up views, because you can kind of get lost in the way in which the camera is manipulated through the 3D views and the project browser. But if you've done it before, it's a pretty straightforward process. And basically, once you have created the 3D view in Revit, you can then use that 3D view to create a view in Enscape. Again, along the Enscape toolbar at the top of your screen, you'll see a camera that says Create to View, and if you're in your 3D view that you've just created and you press Create to View, it will save that location in your Enscape model so that you can return to it in the future. That can be a really good tool if you're creating a rendering and you want to always come back to the same place in the model, or if you're designing from a particular point in the model and you want to really build up the character of the space from one location. From this, you can also do screenshot the file. So whether you're in your Enscape model, and you found a view of your model that you really like and you want to export that as a JPEG or a PNG file, you go back to the Enscape toolbar, and in the top of the Revit Enscape toolbar, you'll see Screenshot to File, and that will open up a window where you'll be able to name and choose a file location for the JPEG that you've just created of the inside of your Enscape 3D environment. So it's a good thing to understand how to do. It's kind of the reason why we have been using it to create presentation images, but I think you'll also find that it is useful as a design tool as well as an image creating